Welcome to Epic HFY Stories. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to check if you've subscribed to our channel. It's completely free, and subscribing will ensure that our stories show up more often in your feed. Ree Anders sat back in his captain's seat, humming off key to an old Earth tune, Moonlight and Hyperdrive, as the stars streaked past him in the black void of space. It had been a long, uneventful trip until now, a simple supply run to Elan 4. But as the ship neared the atmosphere of the planet, something went terribly wrong. His dashboard exploded in a cascade of warning lights, each one blaring an alarm louder than the last. A red streak of panic sliced through his calm exterior as sparks erupted from the engine core. The artificial gravity hiccuped, sending him sliding to one side of the cockpit as the ship lurched, suddenly out of control. "What the hell?" Ree shouted, eyes darting from one screen to the next, each more chaotic than the last. He tried desperately to regain control, but the ship was a beast that refused to be tamed. His fingers flew across the controls, but it was too late. The jungle of Elan 4 rushed up to meet him, thick and endless. Trees, tall as skyscrapers, seemed to reach for the ship like a personal vendetta. He could barely make out their looming shapes through the flashing lights before the crash consumed everything. When Ree finally woke, his head felt as though a solar bear had chewed it, then spat it back out into a blender. His surroundings were sideways, the cockpit now a twisted mess of metal and glass. Sparks still fizzled somewhere behind him, and the air was thick with the smell of burning circuits. "Of course, my boots are gone," Ree muttered dryly, sitting up with a groan, surveying the wreckage. He felt a sting on his forehead and looked up. A neon-green insect the size of a dachshund blinked at him from the ruins of the dashboard, its 9 eyes catching the flickering light from the ship. "Well, nice to meet you too," Ree said, blinking back at the bug, which hissed and scuttled off into the jungle, leaving him with more questions than answers. He struggled to his feet, his muscles sore from the crash, and took a slow, careful step out of the wreckage. The jungle was everything the brochures promised, and more, humid, pulsing with bioluminescent life, trees towering above him like the giants of some forgotten world. The air was thick with scents that were sweet, metallic, and slightly threatening. The jungle wasn't just alive. It was watching. Ree pulled out his cracked scanner, swearing softly when it fizzled to life with only the faintest signal. "Welcome to vacation hell," he muttered, adjusting his gear. This was no simple supply run. His ship was a steaming pile of scrap, and he was deep in unknown territory, supposedly untouched by modern civilization, according to the brochures. He now suspected that untouched also meant unmapped, unhelpful, and full of bugs with very bad attitudes. He set off with his emergency pack, limping slightly as he navigated the dense undergrowth. The jungle was relentless, the air thick with moisture. After a few hours of trekking, stumbling through the dense brush, narrowly avoiding a mud pit that might have been sentient and apologizing to a plant he accidentally insulted, Ree heard it. A high, strange cry. Not quite human, not entirely alien either. Ree stopped. His heart thudded louder than he would have liked. The sound came again. A whimpering, sorrowful noise that could have been a wounded animal, or possibly a really bad singer trapped under something heavy. His better judgment screamed at him to turn around and head back to the wreckage. But something in him, the same thing that had led him to rescue a terrified alien girl years ago, pulled him forward. He had to see this through. He followed the sound through a tangle of vines and trees, and then, in a clearing dappled with light from the twin suns above, he found her. She was no older than 10, maybe, slumped against the trunk of a massive tree. Her skin was a soft silver gray, her hair braided with leaves and metal beads. But it was her ears, long, elegant, swept back like antennas, that caught his attention. Sculpted with delicate precision, they looked almost otherworldly. Her eyes, wide, liquid, and luminous, met his. One of her legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Ree crouched down, careful not to make any sudden moves. "Hey there," he said gently, trying to keep his voice steady. "You hurt?" She flinched, making a sound in her throat that was too alien for him to understand. But the pain in her eyes was clear. "Okay," he murmured to himself. "Let's do this the intergalactic scout way." From his pack, he pulled out a med patch. "This doesn't taste like candy, but it won't kill you." "Probably." She looked at the patch, then back at him. Her ears twitched. "I'm Ree," he said, trying to break the ice. "Captain Ree Anders of the Glory Hound, shipwreck survivor, licensed pilot, and only slightly radioactive." The girl didn't respond, but the terror in her eyes seemed to lessen just a little. He took that as a good sign. He worked for hours, crafting a makeshift stretcher and carefully carrying her toward what he hoped was a rescue beacon. The jungle was relentless, but so was he. She didn't speak again, just watched him with those luminous eyes. At one point, when he tripped on a root and almost dropped her, she made a sound that might have been laughter. He chose to believe it was. Finally, as the sky darkened and the sounds of the jungle grew louder, the rescue drone arrived. Tall figures in leaf-armored suits appeared, speaking in low tones, their movements silent and solemn. They took the girl gently from his arms and nodded at him. No words, just a gesture of thanks. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they vanished into the jungle. Ree stood there, watching them disappear into the foliage. He never learned her name. He never knew if she survived fully or remembered him at all. But something in him, the same part that had pulled him toward her in the first place, told him that their paths would cross again. The years that followed had a way of blurring together for Captain Ree Anders. The once familiar stars now streaked by in an endless stream of hyperspace jumps, each one marking another job, another planet, another challenge to overcome. But none of them compared to the crash landing on Elan 4. The days of peace and quiet seemed distant, like a memory half forgotten, tucked away behind the hum of engines and the constant thrum of his own thoughts. His ship, Glory Hound, had seen better days. With patches and fixes barely keeping it together, it rattled and groaned through the galaxies like an old barn door caught in a storm. But that didn't stop him from flying it. Jobs kept coming. Some were small, like the simple supply run to Elan 4 that started it all. Some were dangerous, pirates on Mars 2, pirates on Titan, and the time he got thrown out of a gambling den for impersonating a famous singer. He still swore the resemblance was uncanny, though no one else seemed to agree. Through it all, though, there was one memory that refused to fade. The girl. That alien girl, the one with silver-gray skin and eyes that shimmered like jewels, the one he had saved so long ago from the depths of Elan 4's jungle. He never learned her name, never knew if she survived, if she remembered him. There were no reports filed, no records in the intergalactic databases, just an image, an unanswered question in the back of his mind. He didn't talk about her. He didn't need to. He carried the memory for himself, the one thing in his life that didn't belong to the stars, the missions, or the endless paperwork that seemed to pile up wherever he went. But he couldn't shake the feeling. Sometimes, late at night when the stars outside his cabin seemed to still, when the hum of the ship lulled him into a strange calm, that somehow, in some distant corner of the universe, their fates were still tied together. Years passed, but it was a day like no other when the unexpected happened. A royal invitation arrived. At first, Ree thought it was a joke. The envelope, embossed with real foil, sealed with a sigil he didn't recognize. Written in Elanian standard, it read, The Queen of Elan IV respectfully summons Captain Rhee Ander to her court. The matter is urgent. Come at once. For a moment, Rhee just stared at the message in disbelief. His fingers hovered over the paper, unable to process what he was reading. The Queen of Elan IV? The girl. The same one he had rescued all those years ago, the one who had disappeared into the jungle and into his memories. The laughter came before he even realized it. It was loud and a little hysterical, bouncing off the walls of his cabin. He raised his glass to no one, the laughter ringing in the emptiness of space. Well, guess she remembered. A part of him had thought, after all this time, that the galaxy had moved on. He had certainly moved on, barely even thinking about that day. But now, out of the blue, it seemed like fate had decided otherwise. He was about to step into a world far more complicated than he had ever imagined. A royal palace, an alien queen, none of it made sense. But then, Rhee thought, nothing in his life ever did. He had always considered himself unfit for places like courts and palaces, not because he lacked charm. Rhee had plenty of charm, or so he was often told, especially by bartenders trying to rush him out of their establishments. But no, it was because every time he found himself in a room where people wore robes without pockets, his instincts screamed wrong place, wrong job, wrong species. So, of course, the invitation had come. The shuttle that arrived to pick him up was sleek and silent, unnervingly so. Its pilot, a woman, or something resembling one, had a synthetic lilt to her voice and eyes that blinked in a steady binary rhythm. The beverage she handed him tasted like strawberries and regret, but Rhee accepted it, too disoriented to do anything else. As the shuttle descended into Elan IV's orbit, everything had changed. The planet, once a backwater jungle, was now teeming with signs of development. Orbital docks, sensor relays, a subtle but unmistakable ring of defense satellites blinking ominously against the starry sky. Someone had been busy. And it wasn't just the planet that had changed. The shuttle veered toward the palace, a majestic structure floating just above a mountain, blanketed in emerald mist. Massive gravity tethers held it in place, shimmering with stabilizing energy. The palace was like nothing Rhee had ever seen. Curved spires, translucent domes that caught the twin suns like dew on spider silk, and long walkways that spiraled into the sky, as if drawn by a cosmic brush. It felt like stepping into a dream, a place crafted by artists and physicists arguing over aesthetics. He stepped off the shuttle and into the heart of Elan IV's royal court. Tall guards, stone-faced and armored in living wood that twisted and regrew with every movement, stood at attention. One of them, holding a spear that hummed with energy, greeted him with a curt nod. "Captain Rhee Ander," said one of the guards, "the Queen awaits. Please do not attempt to touch anything that glows, not even my ego." Rhee raised an eyebrow but held his tongue. It was going to be one of those days. They escorted him through the winding halls of the palace, each more opulent than the last. Vines crept along the walls, glowing softly as he passed. Decorative panels displayed scenes of Elanian history, war, peace, unity, and something that looked suspiciously like a giant squirrel defeating a robot in a duel. He didn't ask. Finally, they brought him to the central chamber, a vast, circular room open to the jungle below, protected by a shimmering energy shield. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat the queen, Velra. Rhee's heart stopped. It had been years, but the moment he laid eyes on her, he knew. She had grown, of course. She was tall, regal, dressed in flowing garments of silver thread that caught the light, dancing with it. Her long ears, adorned with delicate bands of metal, twitched as she regarded him. And those eyes, those silver eyes, locked with his, and something ancient flickered there. Recognition, amusement, a memory. She rose from her throne, her voice smooth and melodic, but now honed into something far stronger. "Captain Ander," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command, "I am honored you answered my summons." Rhys inclined his head, trying to hide the rush of emotions flooding him. "Well, I couldn't resist a royal invite. Plus, I owed you a visit. You know, for the whole saving your life from a wild jungle beast thing." A faint smile curved her lips. "I remember." Rhys took a step forward, instinctively standing straighter. "And what's changed since then?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Her gaze grew serious, the weight of her words filling the space between them. "Much has changed, Rhys. Elenfor is no longer divided. We are one nation now, but that unity is fragile, and some among the stars would see it broken." Rhys paused. He understood then. The stakes were higher now, higher than anything he had ever faced before. "And you need me to help stop that from happening?" he asked, his voice firm. She nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "I need someone I trust, and you, Captain, are the only human I've ever trusted." For a moment, there was silence. A heavy, awkward silence, broken only by the distant sound of a guard sneezing somewhere behind a pillar. "Well," Rhys said with a small grin, breaking the tension, "that's either very flattering or deeply concerning." She smiled, just a little, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Both. Rhys followed Queen Velra as she led him out onto a high balcony that overlooked the vast, lush jungle below. The sight before him was breathtaking. Flying beasts soared beneath them, their wings catching the golden light of the twin suns. The jungle canopy stretched as far as the eye could see, vibrant and alive. It was a scene of tranquil beauty, one that seemed out of place for the heavy conversation they were about to have. But then Velra's voice broke the silence, bringing him back to the gravity of the situation. She pointed to a dark spire rising from the treetops in the distance, stark and menacing against the natural splendor of the jungle. "That," she said, her finger outstretched, "is the Auric Systems Embassy." Rhys squinted at the spire, his mind racing. "Auric Systems? I thought they specialized in weapons and questionable mining ethics." "They do," Velra replied, her voice calm, though tinged with something darker. "But now, they've found something beneath our soil. Something ancient, something powerful." Rhys turned his gaze back to her, his brow furrowing. "Let me guess. You want me to dig around where I probably shouldn't? Make some enemies? Maybe end up on fire?" Velra turned to him, her expression unwavering. "Exactly." Rhys sighed, his shoulders slumping as he tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up on him. He had dealt with pirates, mercenaries, and far too many bureaucrats, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now, bigger than anything he had ever faced. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "When I woke up this morning, I told myself I wouldn't get involved in any interplanetary intrigue. Did it work?" "No," Velra answered dryly, her lips curling slightly in amusement. "Number 1 on your list of resolutions." Rhys chuckled, shaking his head. But even as he laughed, he couldn't ignore the seriousness of her tone. Velra's expression had shifted. No longer playful, but focused. Resolute. She wasn't asking him for help. She was depending on him. The next day, Rhys found himself standing in the palace courtyard, the air thick with anticipation. He was no longer just a scruffy pilot. He was part of something much larger than himself. Velra had assembled a team, specialists hand-picked for their skills and expertise. They were ready to infiltrate the Auric compound, and Rhi was the one who was supposed to help them. He was introduced to the team. June, a botanist who had a peculiar talent for talking to plants. Darrow, a cybernetic engineer who had replaced his own hand with a multifunctional wrench, because apparently, who needed regular hands when you could have a wrench for a hand? And a translator drone that insisted on interpreting every metaphor literally. The group was eccentric, to say the least, but they had one thing in common. They were all in this together, with one goal. Stop Auric Systems before it was too late. Fantastic, Rhi muttered under his breath. The most advanced team I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Just try not to blow anything up, Velra had told him, her voice laced with a calm authority. Unless absolutely necessary. Rhi raised an eyebrow. Define necessary. Necessary is when the entire planet is at risk, she said, her tone firm. And you're the only one who can move without raising political flags, so don't screw this up. Rhi grinned, despite the seriousness of her words. Well, if I don't screw it up, I'll probably get fired. And if I do screw it up, I'll probably get blown up. Either way, I'm covered. The journey to the Auric compound was long and treacherous. The jungle, ever alive with the hum of insects and strange creatures, seemed to have a life of its own. Rhi and the team navigated carefully through the dense undergrowth, careful to avoid the ever-watchful security drones that buzzed overhead like caffeinated wasps. Subtle, Rhi muttered as they neared the compound. The sight of sleek, steel towers looming in the distance made the jungle feel all the more foreign. Auric Systems had designed their compound with an eye for intimidation, their security tight, their technology advanced. It felt like stepping into the heart of a machine designed to consume everything in its path. But they weren't going to let that stop them. We'll make camp here, June said, her voice low. The compound's on high alert, but we can cloak ourselves long enough to get in. Rhi nodded, his mind racing. The team moved swiftly, setting up a hidden camp in the underbrush, masking their scent and any signs of their presence. June whispered to the vines, coaxing them to curl around a nearby sensor post, disguising their movements with the natural camouflage of the jungle. As night fell, the jungle around them seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against their senses. Rhi lay on his back, staring up at the stars through the canopy. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavily on his mind, but there was also something else. A flicker of something familiar. The girl, the queen. Velra. She had been a child in the jungle, hurt and afraid. And now she was a queen, a leader of her people. So much had changed, and yet something about her had stayed the same. A part of him, an inconvenient part, felt the same drive to protect her as he had all those years ago. You still thinking about her? Darrow asked, sitting next to him and fiddling with his multi-tool hand. Rhi turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Who? The queen. Velra. Rhi shrugged, though he knew Darrow could see through him. Just trying to wrap my head around it. From jungle girl to queen. That's a big leap. Darrow grinned, tapping his wrench hand against the ground. Big leaps are fun. Makes the landing more interesting. The massive chamber beneath the Auric compound felt like something out of a dream, or a nightmare. As Rhi and his team entered, the walls seemed to breathe, shifting ever so slightly, as though the very structure of the place was alive. The air was thick with an energy that hummed beneath the surface, filling the room with a strange, almost magnetic pull. This wasn't just a place of technology, it was something older, something more primal. As Ree stepped forward, the floor seemed to pulse beneath his boots, a heartbeat coming from deep within the relic's core. Darrow, with his cybernetic wrench hand, knelt beside a panel connected to the relic's intricate matrix of cables. The faint glow of the relic's surface illuminated his face, making the strange sigils across the walls dance like shadows. "All right," Darrow muttered, as his hand moved over the panel. "We're not dealing with just any ancient tech here. This thing has been grown, not built. The cables, the energy pulses, it's all organic in nature." Ree raised an eyebrow. "Great! So we're dealing with a technoplant. What's next? Philosophical ferns?" June, the botanist, let out a soft chuckle from behind him. "Actually, that's not far off. These plants, if that's what they are, have a consciousness, a purpose. It's not just about power, it's about balance. And this relic, whatever it is, keeps that balance in check." Ree had heard enough to know he didn't entirely understand what they were up against. But that wasn't anything new. What mattered now was stopping it before it was too late. The relic pulsed again, a low hum vibrating through the floor, sending a shiver up Ree's spine. He could feel its weight, like it was trying to pull him in, trying to force him to understand its ancient purpose. But no matter how hard he focused, he couldn't decipher what the relic wanted. It was as if the walls themselves were shifting, asking him questions he wasn't ready to answer. June carefully examined the relic's surface, brushing her fingers against the smooth, rippling material. "It's been disturbed," she murmured. "Whoever's been tampering with this, auric systems, they've activated something. The energy flow is ramping up, but not in a good way." Ree stepped forward, his boots crunching against the remnants of broken technology scattered around the chamber. "How long before it reaches full activation?" Darrow didn't look up from his work, his fingers flying over the interface. 2, maybe 3 days if they don't interfere again. But if they do? If they push it too far, well, it's anyone's guess. Ree let out a long breath, his gaze drifting to the relic's glowing core. "Let's make sure they don't have the chance to find out." Just as he finished speaking, the room trembled. It was subtle at first, a soft shift beneath their feet, but the tremors quickly intensified. The relic, as if responding to their presence, began to react. Its surface shifting faster now, the sigils pulsing like the beating of a heart. The hum of energy grew louder, a low, ominous sound that seemed to resonate deep within Ree's chest. "Too late," Darrow muttered, pulling away from the panel and standing up. "We've triggered it." Ree's pulse quickened. This was it. If they didn't act quickly, the planet itself could be destroyed. The relic's power seemed to surge, and for a moment Ree thought he saw something. Movement, a flicker of light, something beyond the walls. His vision blurred and he stumbled, feeling as if the ground had given way beneath him. It was like the relic was seeing him, reaching out to him, as if it was trying to communicate. But Ree wasn't ready to listen. He couldn't afford to. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. They didn't have much time. Not anymore. "We need to shut it down," Ree said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." June nodded, her face pale as she surveyed the growing disturbance around them. "I can try to interface with it, but I'll need time, and that's not something we have." Before Ree could respond, the floor beneath them shifted once again. This time it wasn't just the tremor of distant power, it was something more. A section of the relic's surface split open with a sound like a sigh, revealing an entrance slick with shimmering light. Symbols rearranged themselves, swirling in a hypnotic dance. "Well, that's inviting," Ree said under his breath, his hand instinctively going to the blaster at his side. Darrow stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the entrance. "I think it wants us to go inside." "Great," Ree muttered, I'm starting to get a bad feeling about this. June, ever the botanist, seemed intrigued rather than frightened. It's responding to us. That's what it wants. Us. Ree glanced at her, his brow furrowing. And you're okay with that? June didn't answer right away, her eyes still locked on the shimmering entrance. It's not like we have much of a choice. With a reluctant sigh, Ree moved toward the entrance, the air around it shimmering with energy. The moment he stepped closer, the relic seemed to react, the light intensifying and drawing him in. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to face the others. "If I don't come back in an hour," he said, giving them a wry smile, "tell Velra I died heroically, or tripping over my own feet. Either works." Darrow grinned, the corners of his eyes crinkling with amusement. Honestly, both are plausible. With that, Ree stepped into the opening, his heart pounding in his chest. The universe inhaled. The interior of the relic was unlike anything Ree had ever seen. It wasn't a room, or a chamber, or anything even remotely familiar. The walls weren't walls at all, but folds of shimmering light and logic that bent and shifted in response to his thoughts. The floor beneath his boots pulsed like a heartbeat, and the bioluminescent root June had given him twitched in his hand as if it had its own life, its own consciousness. "This is insane," Ree whispered to himself, his eyes wide as the walls twisted and reformed, their shapes changing in real time. The relic was alive, and it was aware of him, of his presence. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was bending around him. "Step 1, Ree muttered under his breath. "Don't die." The moment his feet crossed the threshold, the relic seemed to open up in front of him, revealing what could only be described as a control core. Floating platforms hovered in mid-air, a central crystalline obelisk radiating equations that shimmered and shifted with a kind of alien grace. Around it, symbols spiraled like a whirlpool of energy, pulsing with heatless fire. At the base of the obelisk was a seat, or a throne, or maybe a test chair. Ree wasn't sure, but it looked like it was waiting for him. "Let me guess," he said aloud, stepping closer. "You want me to sit in the chair, and because I'm the idiot standing here, you're going to activate the thing, right?" The throne lit up with a reluctant sigh, and the root in his hand made a soft, squelching noise, as if it were encouraging him. Ree sighed, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. "Well, if I'm going to die, at least I'll die with style." With that, he sat down in the throne, and the universe inhaled. The control core activated, and Ree felt his mind stretch. It was like being connected to every part of Elan 4, every molecule of the planet itself. The relic was a world key, a regulator, a planetary balance keeper. But something had gone wrong. The failsafes triggered when Oryx drilling began interfering with the core's harmony. If the relic detected too much disruption, it would trigger a purging. Elan 4 would be reborn through fire and chaos, a complete restructuring of the planet. Total destruction. Ree could feel the power surge around him, the data flooding his mind like a storm. "This is bad," he whispered. Then, through the chaos of the energy, he heard something. A voice. Velra's voice. Ree's heart pounded in his chest as the relic's control core hummed around him. He sat in the throne, if you could even call it that, its surface cool beneath his touch, the soft pulse of energy resonating through his body. It was as though the relic was feeding on his presence, drawing him deeper into its ancient consciousness. It was more than just an object, more than just a piece of technology. It was alive, aware, and it was waiting for something. Waiting for him His mind felt as though it was being pulled in all directions. Thoughts, images, memories, fragments of the relic's ancient purpose rushed through him like a flood. The power of the relic was overwhelming, and for a moment he thought he might lose himself to it. He tried to steady his breathing, but the pressure in his mind only intensified. The relic had a single, overriding purpose: balance. It regulated the relationship between LN4's core and its biosphere, keeping everything in harmony. But somewhere, somehow, that harmony had been disrupted. Oryx Systems drilling, their meddling with the planet's core, had triggered a fail-safe, an ancient protocol meant to purge the planet and restore balance, a total rebirth of Elan 4, one that would leave nothing but ashes in its wake. Ree blinked hard, trying to clear his head, but the flood of information didn't stop. He could see it now, see the disruption in the planet's core. The ancient relic had detected the imbalance, and it was ready to act. A massive restructuring protocol was already underway. If left unchecked, Elan 4 would be destroyed, reborn through fire and chaos. "Oh, that's bad," Ree whispered under his breath, the weight of the situation crashing down on him like a ton of bricks. But just as his thoughts began to spiral into panic, something else caught his attention. Something beyond the relic's chaotic hum. He felt it before he heard it. A gentle pulse of energy, a soft whisper of a voice through the chaos. A voice he knew. Velra. Her presence, even from a distance, was clear. Her connection to the relic was stronger than he could have imagined. She was part of this, and the relic recognized her as such. She had the same connection to the planet as the relic itself. Her DNA, her voice, were embedded in its very fabric. She was born here, and the relic had known her before she had even known herself. And then, as if the relic was responding to that connection, a part of it began to shift. It rippled, the shimmering walls folding and unfolding around him, and for the briefest moment, Ree saw it. A vast expanse, a vision of Elan 4, not as it was now, but as it had been, long before the stars had even known their names. He could see the core of the planet, alive with energy, a living, breathing entity. And at the center of it all stood a figure. Velra, not the queen she had become, but the child he had saved, standing alone in the heart of the planet. Her presence resonating with the very core of Elan 4 itself. "Velra," Ree whispered, his mind reaching out to her, even though he knew she wasn't physically there. Her voice echoed through him, distant but clear, as though it was woven into the very structure of the relic. "Ree, you're not alone." He blinked, his vision clearing. The connection was growing stronger. The relic, with all its ancient power, was allowing them to communicate, to merge. "I need your help," Velra's voice continued, her presence a steady beacon through the chaos. "The relic is responding to you. It knows you, Captain, and it will listen to you." Ree's mind reeled as he processed her words. "How am I supposed to stop this? I'm just a pilot. I don't know anything about saving a planet." She didn't answer right away, but he felt her presence around him, calming him, guiding him. "You have always known what to do, Ree. You just didn't realize it." He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the arms of the throne as the weight of the moment bore down on him. He was the only one who could stop this. The relic recognized him. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had become a part of Elan 4's fate. Ree closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the energy that coursed through the relic, trying to separate the chaos from the calm. He reached out, feeling the vibrations in the core of the planet, and with a sharp inhale, he pulled, trying to redirect the flow of power, trying to realign the imbalance, that had been caused by the Oryx drilling. But it wasn't enough. The relic wasn't responding to him alone. He needed Velra. She was the key. Their connection, their bond, was what the relic had been waiting for. "Velra," Ree called out, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I need you. We have to link. Together. Now." There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. "I'm ready, Ree." And then it happened. The connection between them deepened, and for the briefest moment Ree felt as though he was one with the relic, one with the planet itself. Energy surged through him, and his body buzzed with the power of Elanfor's core. He could feel Velra's presence within him, a warm, steadying force. Together, they reached into the heart of the relic, guiding it back into balance. The structure of the relic rippled, and the energy began to stabilize, the power subsiding as the fail-safe protocols were undone. Slowly, the hum of the relic quieted, the overwhelming pressure lifting from his mind as the planet's core found its harmony once again. Ree collapsed back into the throne, breathless, his body exhausted from the intense connection. His heart was racing, his mind reeling from the overwhelming flood of energy he had just experienced. He had done it. Together, he and Velra had stopped the relic from purging Elanfor. And yet, as the planet's energy settled, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened. They had saved the planet. But for how long? The balance had been restored, but the forces that had disrupted it were still out there, waiting to strike again. "You did it," Velra's voice echoed through him once more, clearer now, full of gratitude. "You saved us, Ree." Ree laughed softly, still catching his breath. "I think we saved each other." With the relic's power now dormant, the room around him began to settle. The energy that had once felt overwhelming now felt like a distant memory, and as the shimmering walls of the relic receded, Ree stood up, unsteady on his feet. The mission wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, Ree felt like he had found his place. He wasn't just a pilot, he was a part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. And somewhere deep within, he knew that Velra's journey, and his own, had only just begun. The humming in the core of Elanfor faded, leaving only silence in its wake. The tremors of the relic's power had subsided, and the tension in Ree's chest began to ease. His body felt heavy, drained from the connection, the near immensity of the energy he'd just experienced. For a moment, everything was still, calm, almost surreal, as though the planet itself was taking a breath, the chaos that had nearly consumed it now quelled. Ree stood slowly from the throne, his legs shaky but firm under him, feeling like he was coming back from the edge of something vast. Darrow, June, and the drone were waiting near the entrance to the chamber, their faces filled with relief. The strange, thick air of the relic room felt lighter now. The oppressive weight of the energy lifted, but that wasn't what concerned Ree. He turned toward the exit, his mind still running on autopilot. He knew they had succeeded. Elanfor was safe for now. But there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a question that wouldn't go away. They had stopped the relic from triggering the planetary purge. But what came next? The damage done by Auric systems, the forces they had set in motion, wasn't going to vanish just because the relic had calmed. "Ree!" Velra's voice called through his comms, cutting through his thoughts like a knife. Her tone was calm, but serious, and he couldn't help but wonder what new challenge she was about to throw his way. "What's the situation on your end?" Ree paused for a moment, trying to compose himself. The adrenaline rush was fading, and the real world was starting to settle back in. "We're clear," he replied, his voice rough but steady. The relic's been neutralized. The planet's core is stabilized. There was a brief silence on the line, and when Velra spoke again, her voice was tinged with something else. Relief, yes, but also something darker, something he couldn't place. Good, but the situation here isn't over. The Auric threat is still very real, Ree, and we need to prepare. Ree exhaled sharply, glancing at Darrow and June, who were already moving toward the exit, still processing the enormity of what they had just done. Prepare for what? He asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Auric systems won't stop. Velra's voice hardened. They want the relic. They want to control Elan 4. And now they know they can dig as deep as they like without triggering a planetary collapse. They won't give up until they've harnessed that power for themselves. Ree gritted his teeth. He had known this wasn't going to end with a simple victory. He could feel the shift in the air around him, the palpable tension that had hung over Elan 4's future. A battle had been won, but a war was still on the horizon. As he stepped out of the relic chamber, the cool air of the jungle hit his skin, the dense foliage shifting in the breeze. The palace, once an imposing and unfamiliar place, now felt oddly like home. But it was a home on the edge of something much larger. As he walked through the winding halls toward the central chamber, the weight of Velra's words hung over him. She had been right. They had only won a temporary reprieve. In the grand chamber, Velra was waiting for him, standing tall as always, but there was something different in her demeanor now, something more regal, more distant. The queen who had once been the girl he had saved was still there, but now there was a cold edge to her, a burden she carried that had only grown heavier since they had averted disaster. Ree stepped forward, his gaze steady as he met her eyes. He had always respected her, but now he could see the weight of her role pressing down on her. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She didn't answer right away, her silver eyes scanning him as if measuring something he couldn't understand. "The planet is safe, Ree," she said finally, her voice calm but strained. "But I am not. None of us are. Auric Systems has more power than we realized, and their reach goes far beyond what we can see." Ree took a deep breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not exactly a diplomat, Velra, but I've dealt with organizations like Auric before. They're not invincible." Velra gave him a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They are not invincible," she agreed, "but they are relentless, and we cannot afford to be complacent." Just then, a commotion echoed from the hallways, and the heavy doors to the chamber opened. A small group of advisors, faces grim and serious, filed in. Among them was the elder, who had once stood by Velra's side, a figure that seemed even older now, weighed down by years of worry. "The Auric Systems Embassy has issued a formal demand for the relic's return," the elder said, his voice low and urgent. "They claim ownership under the Interplanetary Corporate Accord." Ree's stomach twisted. Of course they would. Auric Systems would never back down, not when they believed they had a claim to something so powerful. Velra's face tightened. "We knew this was coming." "What's our next move?" Ree asked, stepping forward. Velra turned to face him, her gaze steady but conflicted. "We'll fight for it." Ree's mind raced as he took in the situation. The political game was about to begin, and it would be one of the most dangerous he had ever played. But Velra had been right. This wasn't over. They would need more than just strength to win this fight. They needed allies, strategies, and an understanding of how deep Auric's influence really ran. "We'll need to rally the tribes of Elan 4, Velra continued. "The unity we've built is fragile, but if we stand together, we can resist them. I won't let this planet fall into their hands." Ree nodded. "And I'll be by your side. Whatever it takes." As they began to discuss their next steps, Ree found himself looking out of the massive windows of the chamber, the jungle stretching out beneath them. The sky above was clear, but beneath it, the uncertainty of the future loomed large. This wasn't just a fight for Elan 4 anymore. It was a fight for everything that had been built, the fragile peace, the connections they had made, the lives that depended on them. Ree had been a pilot once, a wanderer, just trying to get by. But now, he was a part of something much bigger, something that would shape the future of an entire world. And he wasn't about to let it fall. The meeting room was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that weighed on a person's shoulders like a thick, oppressive blanket. Velra stood at the head of the table, surrounded by her advisors and key leaders from the tribes of Elan 4. Ree, leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, studied the faces in the room. He had been here for only a few hours, but it felt like a lifetime. The stakes had been set. Elan 4 was teetering on the edge of a precipice, and the enemies they faced weren't just the Auric systems. They were the complex web of politics, alliances, and power plays that spanned the stars. Velra turned to the gathering, her gaze unwavering. "We have no time to waste," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The Auric systems demand the relic, and their influence is growing. We cannot afford to be passive." The tension in the room thickened. The leaders of the tribal outposts exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a mix of concern and skepticism. They knew how important the relic was, but they also knew how dangerous the coming fight would be. "We've already seen the reach of Auric's power," one of the leaders, a tall woman named Nira, spoke up, her voice low and controlled. "They will not stop at the relic. They will take our resources, our land, and our people." "But how do we stop them? We've never had to face anything like this before." Velra's eyes narrowed as she addressed Nira's concerns. "That's exactly why we must stand united. Elan 4 must show the galaxy that we will not be silenced. We cannot allow them to divide us. We need to build alliances, both with the tribes of Elan 4 and with those who would stand against Auric's greed." Ree pushed himself off the wall and walked over to the table, glancing down at the star charts that were projected in the center of the room. His finger traced a path across the map, following the orbital routes and the locations of key systems. "I've worked with mercenaries, diplomats, and more shady characters than I care to count," he said, his voice low but clear. "And I can tell you one thing. Auric doesn't care about alliances. They care about power, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." Nira's eyes met Ree's, a hint of distrust lingering in her expression. "And what do you propose, Captain?" she asked, the emphasis on his title heavier than it should have been. Ree didn't flinch. "We need to hit them where it hurts. We've got a few advantages. First, Auric's spread too thin. Their interests span across multiple systems. They may have power, but they don't have the manpower to maintain control over everything at once. Second, Elan 4 might be seen as a backwater, but there are people out there, groups, organizations, that will stand with us, especially when they see the threat Auric poses. If we can make the right contacts, get the right people on our side, we can push back." Velra nodded, her expression thoughtful but determined. "And what else?" "We need intel," Ree continued, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We need to know everything Auric's been up to, what they're really after with this relic, what they're planning to do with it once they have control. We've already seen that they'll stop at nothing to get it. But if we can get our hands on their intel, we'll know how to strike." The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone considered the gravity of what he was proposing. Nira spoke again, her voice softer now. "We can try to get in touch with the Black Sails. she suggested. "They're an independent faction, mercenaries with a reputation for getting things done. They might be able to help us infiltrate Oryx's inner circle." Rhee's eyes flickered with recognition. The Black Sails were a notorious group. They were ruthless, but effective. If anyone could gather the intel they needed, it was them. "I know the Black Sails," Rhee said, a hint of a grin playing on his lips. "And I've got a few old friends who owe me a favor. I'll get them on board." As the strategy session continued, Velra and Rhee began to solidify their plans. They needed more than just military strength to win this fight. They needed to outsmart Oryx, get ahead of them before they could even strike. The alliances they formed would be crucial to their survival. But it wasn't just the tribes of Elan IV they needed to rally. It was the entire interplanetary community that could stand against Oryx's corporate empire. After the meeting, as the room cleared and the leaders drifted away to prepare for their respective tasks, Velra remained behind. Rhee lingered at the edge of the room, watching her as she studied the star maps, her mind clearly still working through every possible outcome. "You've been quiet," Rhee said, stepping toward her, breaking the silence. "More planning, less talking, huh?" She looked up, her expression softening as she met his eyes. "I have a lot on my mind, Rhee. We both do." Rhee raised an eyebrow. "So you're telling me the Queen of Elan IV doesn't have all the answers?" Velra chuckled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Not this time," she admitted. "This fight is bigger than just me, bigger than just Elan IV. If Oryx succeeds here, it won't just be Elan IV that suffers. The entire galaxy could be at risk. Their reach is endless. Their resources are limitless." Rhee nodded, stepping closer. "Then we'll make sure they don't succeed." For a moment, the weight of the situation hung in the air between them. Velra stood, taking a deep breath before meeting his gaze once more. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. Rhee smiled, though there was a hint of weariness in his eyes. "We're in this together, Velra. Always have been. Always will be." As they worked together, the uncertainty of their situation lingered. But there was something else now, something unspoken. They had formed a bond that went beyond their shared past. They were no longer just a pilot and a queen. They were partners in this fight, standing side by side against an enemy that threatened everything they held dear. The days ahead would be filled with uncertainty. The political alliances they formed would be tested, and Oryx would not sit idly by. But Rhee and Velra knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to give up without a fight. The air felt heavier now, the weight of impending action pressing down on everyone in the palace. The brief moment of quiet after the strategy meeting was over, and the reality of what they faced began to sink in. Elan IV had been saved, for now. But Oryx Systems wasn't backing down. They would not simply let the relic slip from their grasp. Rhee paced outside the war room, his boots echoing in the quiet hallway. His mind was racing, thoughts darting from one plan to another. He had a list now. A mission, a series of critical objectives that would either make or break their fight. The first, and most immediate, get in touch with the Black Sails. Mercenaries, independent and merciless. If they could infiltrate Oryx's inner circle and gather the intel they desperately needed, they might just have a shot. He stopped as he reached the end of the hallway, where Velra was standing by the massive windows that overlooked the jungle below. The sight of the vast green expanse always brought some semblance of calm, but not today. Today, the beauty of the jungle seemed like an illusion, fragile, ready to be shattered. "Rhee," Velra's voice cut through his thoughts as he approached her. She turned to face him, her expression serious, focused. I know you have contacts in the Black Sails. Do you trust them? Ree nodded without hesitation, though there was a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. I trust them to get the job done, but trust them beyond that? It's complicated. Mercenaries don't play by the rules, Velra, but right now, we don't have the luxury of picking and choosing who plays on our team. Velra's silver eyes softened, understanding the weight of his words. I know. She paused for a moment, her voice lower now, filled with a quiet resolve. This isn't just a battle for the relic, Ree. It's a battle for the future, for the survival of Elan 4 and everything we've worked to build. We can't afford to fail. Ree exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I get it, we all do. But getting the Black Sails on our side won't be easy. They're not exactly the type to join a rebellion just because someone asks nicely. We'll need leverage, something to make it worth their while. Velra nodded, her gaze turning toward the distant jungle again, her mind clearly turning over options. I'll work on securing the tribal alliances. We need a united front, not just against Auric, but against anyone who tries to disrupt our sovereignty. You focus on the Black Sails. We need them in this. Ree gave her a crooked grin. And if the Black Sails turn us down? Then we'll make them an offer they can't refuse, Velra said, her voice sharp with determination. We're not asking for help, Ree. We're demanding it. Later that evening, Ree found himself on the outskirts of the palace, standing near the docking bay where a sleek transport ship awaited. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the jungle. The peaceful scene felt like an illusion, a temporary calm before the storm. His communicator buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. Ree, it's Darrow, came the voice through the comm, crackling with static. We've got a situation. Ree's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? I've been tracking Auric's movements, Darrow continued, and they're making a move. Their fleet's been repositioned, high-profile ships, military grade. They're not just after the relic anymore, Ree. They're gearing up for an invasion. Ree's stomach tightened. How soon? I'd say within the next 48 hours. We don't have long. Ree didn't hesitate. He turned toward the transport ship, moving with purpose. I'm on my way to make contact with the Black Sails. We need that intel, and we need it now. Be careful, Darrow warned. The Black Sails won't make this easy, but we don't have time to be subtle. Ree's hand hovered over the ship's controls as he entered the cockpit, settling into the familiar seat with a sharp sense of urgency. I'm not planning to be subtle, he muttered to himself, as he set a course for the Black Sails' hidden base on the fringes of the outer rings. The Black Sails base was exactly as Ree had remembered. Dark, concealed, and heavily fortified. The outer walls were made of reinforced metal and camouflaged mesh, blending seamlessly with the surrounding asteroid fields. As he approached, a pair of heavily armed ships emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on his ship. He couldn't help but smile. He'd been expecting this. Incoming vessel, state your business, a cold voice crackled through the comms. Ree leaned back in his seat, his hand resting casually on the controls. Ree Anders, captain of the Gloryhound, here to speak to your leader. Tell them I've got an offer they can't refuse. There was a long pause, and for a moment Ree thought they might shoot him down just for fun. But then the voice returned, grudgingly acknowledging his presence. You have 5 minutes, came the reply. Inside the Black Sails base, Ree was greeted by the cold, metallic walls of their command center, which was lit by dim, flickering lights. A group of rough-looking mercenaries stood around, eyeing him as he stepped inside. At the far end of the room, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall, wearing a black cloak with the insignia of the Black Sails emblazoned on his chest, a symbol of power, of neutrality in the galaxy's conflict. Ree didn't need to be introduced. He knew this man. "Kaidan," Ree said with a smirk. "I figured you'd be the one to greet me." Kaidan's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of recognition in them. "Ree Anders," he said with a gruff chuckle. "Last time I saw you, you owed me a drink. I'm still waiting on that." Ree grinned. "I'm not here for a drink, Kaidan. I need your help, and I'm sure you're going to want to hear me out." Kaidan leaned back, folding his arms. "Go on." Ree laid out the situation. The imminent threat of Oryx Systems, their military buildup, and the fact that they had something Elan IV couldn't afford to lose. He spoke of the relic, the stakes, and the necessity of their help to prevent an invasion that could wipe out not just the planet, but everything they had fought for. Kaidan listened carefully, his gaze never leaving Ree's. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more serious. "You've got my attention," he said, "but you're not the only one who's been keeping an eye on Oryx. We've got our own intel. They've been making moves, but they've also been making mistakes. If you want us in, you'll need to make it worth our while. We don't work for free." Ree didn't hesitate. "We'll give you access to Elan IV's defenses, every piece of tech we have, and we'll help you move on Oryx assets. You want to hit them where it hurts? We'll make sure you get what you need." Kaidan studied him for a long moment, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, he nodded. "Deal. But remember, Captain, once we're in, there's no turning back." As Ree prepared to leave the Black Sails base, a sense of resolve settled over him. The pieces were finally falling into place. They had a plan, they had allies, and they had the will to fight. The war for Elan IV wasn't over. It had just begun. But Ree knew one thing for certain. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were fighting back. The atmosphere in Elan IV's palace had shifted from one of cautious optimism to something much more urgent. The Black Sails were now officially in the fold, and while their help came at a steep price, they had the resources to turn the tide. But that didn't mean the situation was any less dangerous. If anything, it had only grown more volatile. Ree stood by the comms station, listening intently as the intel came through. Oryx Systems had begun their full-scale operation. New ships, more firepower, and a tight grip on their operations. They had fortified their positions, and every move they made now seemed to be carefully calculated, as though they were anticipating the resistance from Elan IV. The mercenaries had gotten their hands on some of Oryx's top-secret military data, but the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Oryx wasn't just trying to take the relic. They were setting the stage for something much bigger. They had found something beneath Elan IV's surface, something ancient and powerful, a threat far worse than anyone had imagined. "It's worse than we thought," Darrow's voice broke into Ree's thoughts through the comms. "They've activated the core, Ree. The disruption has begun. The energy levels are spiking." Ree's stomach tightened. If the core was activated, it would trigger the planetary destruction protocol again, only this time it might be irreversible. He exchanged a grim look with Velra, who had just entered the room, her expression steely. "We don't have much time," Velra said, her voice tight. "What's our move?" Ree sighed, leaning over the table where the star charts and battle plans were projected. "Our best chance is to hit them before they can activate the core fully. We've got one shot at this." The Black Sails had provided them with a ship capable of deep space infiltration, sleek and fast, a stark contrast to Ree's battered Gloryhound. He had never been fond of stealth missions. His style had always been a bit more direct. But this time, it was different. They had to move quickly and quietly, infiltrating Oryx lines before they could fully fortify their positions. Ree, Velra, and a handful of elite mercenaries stood on the bridge of the ship, the black expanse of space stretching before them. The Black Sails ship hummed with the low growl of its engines, a predator waiting to pounce. Every movement felt calculated, every breath heavy with the tension of the impending mission. "We're clear for now," the pilot, a quiet, efficient mercenary named Reich, said from the helm. "But once we hit the atmosphere, it's all on us. No second chances." Ree nodded, walking over to where Velra stood. She was quiet, contemplative, and for a moment, Ree wasn't sure what she was thinking. The weight of the crown had never been heavier on her, and this mission was more than just a battle for her. It was a fight for her people, her legacy. "You okay?" Ree asked, his voice quieter than usual. Velra glanced up at him, her silver eyes flickering with something unreadable. For a moment he thought she might pull away, but instead she stepped closer. "We've come this far," she said, her voice steady. "But the hardest part is still ahead of us." Ree gave a half smile, but there was an edge of seriousness to his gaze. "I never signed up for easy, Velra." She nodded. "Neither did I." As they descended into the atmosphere, the tension grew, thicker than the clouds that swirled beneath them. Oryx's defenses were extensive, but they had a plan. They would slip through the cracks, silent, unseen, until they reached the heart of the operation. Once there, they would disable the power grid, preventing Oryx from fully activating the planetary destruction protocol. But the further they went into Oryx's territory, the more dangerous the mission became. The fleet was already in motion, their ships massive and menacing, moving in tight formations. The air around them was thick with the energy of an impending conflict, and every signal they intercepted only increased their urgency. Ree's pulse quickened as he watched the scanner. "They've spotted us," he muttered, eyes darting to the control panel. "We don't have much time now." "Engage evasive maneuvers," Velra ordered, her voice sharp with authority. "We can't afford to be caught. Not now." Reich's fingers flew over the controls as the ship dipped and swerved through a labyrinth of orbital defense stations. It was a dance. Every move calculated, every turn timed to perfection. They were in enemy territory now, and the slightest misstep could mean disaster. When they finally broke through Oryx's defensive perimeter and descended into the lower atmosphere, the true scale of the mission became clear. Elen 4's landscape stretched before them, the jungle covered in a dense, oppressive haze. Somewhere beneath the dense canopy lay Oryx's compound, heavily fortified, bristling with weapons and technology, and beneath that, the core, ready to be activated. "This is it," Velra said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Ree turned to her, meeting her gaze one last time. They both knew what was at stake. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. They had to stop Oryx, not just for Elen 4, but for the future of every world caught in Oryx's greedy grip. They landed near the compound, the ship's landing gear sinking into the soft earth with a low metallic groan. The Black Sails team readied their weapons, and Ree checked his blaster, his mind focused, the adrenaline pumping in his veins. "Remember," Velra said, her voice firm but filled with that same determination. "We disable the core first, then we strike. Take no prisoners." "Understood," Ree said, his hand resting on the grip of his blaster as he led the way out of the ship. "Let's make sure this counts." As they moved closer to the compound, the silence of the jungle was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional hum of distant machinery. The deeper they moved into the heart of Oryx's territory, the more guarded they became, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle of the leaves a signal of danger. They reached the outer perimeter of the compound, and Ree motioned for the team to halt. A large steel gate loomed in front of them, the entrance guarded by a series of high-tech security drones. The time for subtlety was over. Ree pulled a grenade from his belt, his movements quick and efficient. "Get ready," he muttered, his fingers slipping the pin free. The blast echoed through the air, a deafening sound that shattered the quiet. The gate exploded outward, leaving a jagged hole in its wake. The mercenaries charged forward, weapons raised, while Ree and Velra took point. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down, like the calm before a storm. The battle had begun. As the dust settled, they pushed deeper into the compound. The alarms had been triggered, and the sound of footsteps approaching grew louder with every passing second. But Ree and Velra knew they had no time to waste. The heart of Oryx's operation was just ahead. This was their chance to end it all, to strike at the core, disable the planetary destruction protocol, and stop Oryx from claiming Elan 4 as their own. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with flickering lights and heavy metallic doors. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind them, the urgency of their mission pressing down on each of them. Ree's heart pounded in his chest as he led the way, Velra close behind, her gaze sharp and focused, her every movement a reflection of the leadership she had grown into. The compound was heavily fortified, but they had breached the first line of defense, and now only one thing remained: the core. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to the heart of Oryx Systems' operation. They had to reach the central chamber before the planetary destruction protocol could fully activate. Time was running out. "We're getting close," Darrow's voice crackled over the comms. "The core is just ahead. You'll need to disable the power grid before they can trigger the failsafe." Ree didn't reply. He didn't need to. The urgency was clear in his eyes. They had already breached the outer defenses, but Oryx's counterattack had been swift. The security drones had launched an assault, and now they were dealing with an escalating firefight. The sound of blaster fire rang in the air, the impact of energy bolts ricocheting off the walls. Their team was holding strong, but they couldn't afford to be bogged down for long. "Keep moving," Velra urged, her voice sharp as she cleared a room full of security guards with a well-placed shot. "The core's power grid won't wait for us to catch our breath." Ree nodded, pushing forward with the rest of the team. They moved quickly, taking cover as blaster fire sizzled through the air. Their goal was clear: reach the core, disable the failsafe, and stop the countdown before it was too late. Finally, they reached the entrance to the central chamber. The massive doors slid open with a heavy metallic groan, revealing the heart of Oryx's operation. The room was vast, dominated by a towering structure at the center, an intricate lattice of energy conduits, glowing cables, and alien technology. At the center of it all stood the core, pulsating with energy, its surface rippling with crackling power. "We're too late," Jun muttered, her voice grim. "The energy levels are through the roof. It's already activated." Ree felt his stomach drop. They had come so far, only to be faced with the possibility that they were too late to stop the impending destruction. "Not if I can help it," Velra replied, her voice unwavering as she moved to a console near the core. Her fingers flew over the controls, trying to override the system. "Darrow, is the signal interference up yet?" "Almost there," Darrow's voice crackled through the comms. "Just a few more seconds." Ree kept his eyes on the door, his hand on his blaster, every nerve in his body alert. The security drones were closing in on them, and he could hear the sound of footsteps pounding through the hallways. They didn't have much time. "We can't hold them off forever," Ree said, his voice tense as he watched the door. "We need to move, now." Velra's fingers moved faster over the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. The energy around the core flared in response, a low hum reverberating through the floor. "The power grid is connected to the core's failsafe. If we can sever the link, it'll stop the countdown." "Then let's do it," Ree urged, his hand gripping his blaster tighter. In the chaos of the firefight, the door to the central chamber slid open once again. More security guards poured in, guns raised. Ree didn't hesitate. He fired first, taking down one of the guards as Velra continued working on the console. They needed cover, and they needed it fast. "We've got a few seconds," Darrow warned over the comms, his voice sharp. "The interference will be up in just a few moments, but you have to hold them off until then." Ree glanced at Velra, his expression resolute. "We hold them off." With a series of quick movements, he signaled the team to take positions. The room erupted into chaos as blaster fire filled the air. Ree ducked behind a column, narrowly avoiding a stream of shots aimed his way. He fired back, his aim precise, his movements sharp. He could hear the sound of the Black Sails mercenaries moving to his side, returning fire, and buying them time. "The interference is up," Darrow's voice rang through the comms, just as the blaster fire intensified. "Get ready," Velra said, her voice steady as she connected the final sequence on the console. The hum of the core intensified as the countdown continued. Ree pushed forward, taking out 2 more guards in rapid succession. The mercenaries were doing their best to hold off the incoming wave, but it was clear that the odds were stacking up against them. "Velra," Ree called, his voice urgent. "We need to move now! The interference won't hold for long." Velra didn't reply immediately. She was still locked in a battle with the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Almost there," she muttered, her voice strained. "Just a little longer." Ree glanced around, his mind racing. The room was filling with smoke, the air thick with the stench of burned circuits and metal. He could hear the countdown getting louder, the pressure building as the core hummed with ominous energy. They were running out of time. "Done!" Velra shouted, her voice filled with a rush of triumph. The core flickered once, then went silent. The countdown ceased. The humming power that had threatened to tear the planet apart died down. The mercenaries fell back, their weapons trained on the now deactivated core. The tension in the room slowly began to ease, but it wasn't over yet. The threat hadn't disappeared. It had just been delayed. Ree walked over to Velra, a slight grin breaking through his serious expression. "We did it," he said, though his words were tinged with a cautious relief. Velra nodded, her face tight with determination. "We stopped the core. For now. But Auric isn't done with us yet." Ree exhaled sharply, his eyes scanning the now silent room. "They won't stop until they get what they want. But now we have a fighting chance." The battle wasn't over, but they had just won a critical victory. Elen 4 was safe, for the moment. But as Ree and Velra stood together in the heart of Auric Systems' compound, they knew that the war had only just begun. The core had been disabled, the destruction halted, but Auric Systems would regroup. They would come for Elan 4 again, and when they did, Ree and Velra would be ready. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This fight was far from over, and together they would face whatever came next.